Well, welcome to Chapter 8, where what we're doing is we're looking at photosynthesis. And in the next, 2 presentations probably, we're going to look at how Mother Nature did something really quite unique. And that is, what she did, of course, is she figured out a way to take energy. You already know this, right? Here's the sun, way over here, right? And radiant energy hitting something that's cooling over hundreds of millions of years, 4 billion years or so, right? And then as it's cooling, it has these different chemical reactions. And what ends up happening, of course, is you increase the complexity such that there are distinct, whoops, we got rid of all that drawing. What happened? Okay, well, let's do something else here. Let's do this. Let's imagine then what we do is we've created a series of structures that have the ability to actually detect. I'm going to put something that looks like a chloroplast inside of here. Right? Inside of some single-celled structure that will ultimately then, let's change light. Okay. And even though you see yellow, what I want you to understand, of course, is that what Mother Nature is doing is she's taking different frequencies of energy, hitting different structures now inside of, say, a single-celled structure. You're going to find these inside the ocean, phytoplankton, or plants, which are terrestrial. And the idea, of course, is they shifted from the ocean to terrestrial environments over the course of hundreds of millions of years. And of course, the complexity is changing even to this day. The responsiveness to the change in the amount of heat present in our environment and what that actually does to certain plants is beyond the scope of what we'll talk about inside this class, but it is not beyond the scope of thinking about how Mother Nature has a certain amount of energy and those structures that try to capture it, even if it's only to transfer the energy, say, from the sun. Because here's the sun again, right? Here's that really bad cartoon. The sun is 93 million miles away, somehow striking things, passing through an atmosphere such that it can be transformed. And really what I want you to remember, of course, is that Mother Nature is transforming it, or the reason why these plants are transforming is because they live in an environment where carbon dioxide is rich. And when carbon dioxide, throwing a little bit of water inside there, lo and behold, you have the ability, by creating a series of dehydration synthesis reactions, such that you end up with something that looks vaguely like this. H12O6. Okay. So that's ultimately what we're aiming towards, but let's see what we actually develop. Gotta get rid of the cartoons. Wow. So, but before we get to that, autotrophs and heterotrophs. There are 2 types of autotrophs. There's a photoautotroph. They include plants, algae, and cyanobacteria. And there are chemoautotrophs, such as thermophilic bacteria. And of course, the idea is they all capture some form of energy so that they can actually make food for themselves. And also that food will then be used or put inside a cycle or environmental cycle such that it will be transformed between different organisms. And that's equally as important because without, say, bunny, eating blades of grass and then the fox coming along and nicking the bunny and then, somehow figuring out that energy will then be transformed. Imagine it's a mother fox and she has little cubs sitting at home. You get the idea. Heterotrophs, including animals, fungus, and most bacteria, rely on the sugars that are produced by autotrophs. And you should know this already, right? Think about the loaf of bread sitting inside the cupboard that nobody ate. They didn't want to eat the ends. And next thing you know, some mold is sitting on it, breaking that down and using it as an energy source. Now, at the end of the day, of course, there's a constant battle between fungus and bacteria. So part of what's actually going to happen is the bacteria will then try to attack the fungus, and the fungus will try to attack the bacteria, similar to what we actually see here. Bacteria will utilize the energy from the fungus as well as the bread inside the drawer, but the predator eats the deer and receives a portion of that energy. So if the fungus is breaking down the bread and the bacteria attacks the fungus, it doesn't get all of the energy. Similar to us, when you eat a salad, you didn't get all of the energy that was collected in the leaves of those plants. You got some of it. Okay? So why do we care? Okay? Photosynthesis uses solar energy to produce sugars, but we know these sugars to be carbohydrates, and I've already drawn out this equation for you. And it's interesting that, they show this sort of root system on this beach where it's demonstrating this is where water comes into the system. And you actually think about how it is things like plants and trees and all of that actually have evolved to make sure that this really simple equation occurs without fail. This is actually, rather interesting because if you think about it, if we're on a beach here, it could be a specific type of water, and that means the plant then has to adapt to that type of water. You think about mixed brackish water environments where the tonicity will have to change. And you think about what happens when you are considering tonicity. And we'll come back to how that all works later. Before we actually get into the chemical nature of photosynthesis, let's establish the source of all the components. So water has to be absorbed by roots from the soil if you're a plant. But if you're living in something in the ocean or you're living in something in fresh water, there'll be some mechanism for you to actually get that material in. And carbon dioxide is acquired from the result of gas exchange. And on plants, at least, the underneath, they have these things that are called stomata, okay? And these stomata, actually the opening is guarded by these things that we call guard cells, and they open or closed. Or you find them in an open or closed state. Sorry about that. And of course, the idea is that they're also going to let oxygen out. So if we're going to draw that here for you, let's just do this. Okay, we'll say O2 literally comes out of here. So the waste product of the cell is oxygen. And this is why when you go to your favorite, during the beginning of this COVID thing, right? Every single magazine came out with, put more plants in your house to clean your air. Really what they're talking about is you have an enrichment in those cells that are actually making oxygen inside of a small environment. But of course, they need water and they need sunlight. If you don't provide them that, well, they're not making too much oxygen for you. But there are very few plants that literally clean the air that you're breathing. They do have the ability to filter materials inside the soil, but that's a completely different biology type of class. The leaf structure itself, if you go watch this is actually kind of cool. Somebody got paid a lot of money to put some animation together so you can actually see how they're all built. But think about what a leaf is, right? It's a certain amount of surface area, and that certain amount of surface area has to collect a certain amount of radiant energy. And the interesting thing is about radiant energy is the radiant energy has to be different wavelengths. And we'll come to what that actually looks like in a bit. But right now, if you go take a look at this, maybe you'll be interested in what you see. I've already drawn this out for you, but notice this is a balanced equation. You have 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, and in the presence of that sunlight, you then will make that carbohydrate. And everybody says it's glucose, but it could be fructose, it could be anything. But the idea, of course, is it's 6 carbon dioxide molecules are required to make 1 glucose molecule, 1 fructose molecule. And you end up making 6 molecules of oxygen, the gas. And you can see what's going to happen. We're going to go through a series of dehydration synthesis reactions, and some of the oxygen is left over. Just count your oxygens, right? You have 6 times 2 are 12 here, and 6 times that, or 6 there, so there's 18. But so is 6 times that there, right? So 6 there, right? So somehow we have to make this all balance out. 12 and 6 are 18, which is great. Now there are 2 metabolic pathways where photosynthesis is actually occurring, and that's the light reaction and the Calvin reaction. So just like cellular respiration, photosynthesis involves complex sets of reactions, and we're going to get into those now. Where are they happening? The light reaction converts light energy into chemical energy, making ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, and nicotinamide adenine Oh, frick, Jonathan. Guys, I'm forgetting what it is. I will pause here and go look at nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. And the H is there just because we need to carry an electron. So it's going to occur inside a specific area of a chloroplast. So the chloroplast is the structure. Inside of here we have these granum, and the granum actually have membranes, and those membranes are made up of these things we call thylakoids, right? So the membrane of a thylakoid structure inside of a chloroplast is actually capturing that energy. And what's going to happen, of course, is the Calvin cycle uses the ATP that's going to be made in the light reaction, okay, and NADPH, to make the sugar. It occurs in the stroma of the chloroplast, which is, of course, going to be over here. So we make materials that transfer it over here, and then somehow we end up getting the products of the Calvin cycle such that we can now make that sugar itself. Okay, so where are we going to go? Well, I just want to finish this piece up with what does a chloroplast actually look like? What is it going to do? The chloroplast structure here, the double membrane, outer and inner, okay, and it's going to have an intermembrane space. The stroma is not to be confused with stoma or stomata, and the grana lack thylakoid, or stacks of thylakoids, my God, okay? And the lumen is, of course, inside the thylakoid, right? So note, only plant cells that conduct photosynthesis have chloroplasts. High densities of chloroplasts will occur inside the middle part of the leaf itself. Okay, so Mother Nature is putting them where she is most likely to find the energy required to stimulate those thylakoid membranes. Okay. And the last thing I want to add is, well, what is that energy? Okay, we'll take a pause after this. Light energy is electromagnetic energy, and right, it's composed of photon particles that are traveling as waves. So there's a series of experiments done in physics in the early 1900s that demonstrated that light is both a particle and a energy source. And because of this, or I should say, what plants have done long before we knew this was the case, right, is only a fraction of the energy is used to stimulate the production or transform the production of materials into energy for the plant, energy for the autotrophs and the heterotrophs. That's a good place to pause.